Please welcome Tony Maher.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for the opportunity of the National Press Club. My presentation's called Boom for Whom? The Australian economy is in danger of being torn apart by the resources boom. The high prices paid for our minerals, the unprecedented foreign investment to dig up those minerals, and the rising value of the Australian dollar are already reshaping our economy. This is only the beginning. It will end, all booms do, but this one will take some time and it will bring great change. We need to think big. The mining companies are, as record prices spur them on into prime farming land and deeper and more distant reserves. Capitalism demands that companies think about themselves. Democracy requires that our governments think about the rest of us. Navigating this boom and emerging with our economy and society intact is going to require government leadership, vision and backbone in spades, and a willingness from business to stop relying on their default catch cries of the past and engage boldly with new ideas. Right now, there is $174 billion of firmly committed funds racing down the investment pipeline to build new resources projects, mostly LNG, iron ore and coal, with another $256 billion of less definite projects but likely to go ahead queued up behind them. And this massive investment, more than any other sector of the economy combined, is coming because the promise of profit resounds. Commodity prices have tripled in the last 10 years and are likely to remain high for 2 or 3 decades. The resounding promise of profit. The Australian dollar is a commodity currency, so the dollar will be high for a long time too. The strength of the dollar is the greatest economic challenge faced by Australian industry and employers. Education, tourism and retail are all under the pump. Manufacturing, which in the past has been geared for an exchange rate of 65 to 75 cents, is staring down the barrel of another 20 to 30 years of an inflated dollar, post-parity. Manufacturing employs 1 million Australians. It's the major source of the skilled blue-collar jobs that sustain our great industrial regions. Make no mistake, left to its own devices, the mining boom will kill manufacturing. This is a very big problem. It calls for big solutions, but the economic reform debate we've seen playing out has scarcely reflected this. Instead, a conga line of business chiefs hark back to the 80s and 90s, using catch cries of increased competitiveness and productivity, IR reform, lower costs, IR reform, individual contracts. The answer from business to this economic challenge, to the start of the Asian century, to this realignment of the planets for our economy, boils down to this: cutting penalty rates, getting rid of leave loading, longer hours, less pay. Even the manufacturers, the people my friend Mr Anderson represents, the people who are in harm's way, whose businesses are under threat from the dollar pushed sky high by mining profits, can hardly bring themselves to stand up to the miners and demand a piece of the mining action. No, their plan for getting through the boom is by asking workers to pay, to ride out the high dollar by becoming low-cost producers, to compete with China's low-wage, mass-producing manufacturers on the world stage. Will someone tell them they're dreaming? Although in these beliefs, the mining companies and the manufacturers have common cause. The miners want IR reform too. And over the years, the miners have pursued their anti-union individual contract flexibility agenda with religious zeal. Yet the miners' religion has become the opiate of the manufacturers, a false consciousness that is blinding them to the bleeding obvious. The alleged productivity problem is simply lazy management. Lazy management thinking that wage cuts equals productivity improvement. Cutting penalty rates and wages does produce a one-off and unsustainable increase in output per dollar of wages. It produces no long-term ongoing gains. Real productivity growth comes from innovation, better technology, increased skills and better infrastructure, none of which are produced by cutting penalty rates and wages. As that well-known lefty think tank, the National Australia Bank, our sponsor today, made clear in a productivity report just a fortnight ago, Labor productivity figures are being dragged down by the mining sector because record resource prices are sparking record capital investment by mining companies. You don't produce a lot when you're building mines. High prices drive the development of deeper, poorer and more distant reserves. And guess what happens to productivity? It plummets, and it's dragging the rest of the economy down. Anyway, the idea that unbridled management prerogative, unshackled from pesky unions and government red tape, can deliver higher productivity levels is unfounded on the evidence. In mining, the statistics show that output per person has increased faster in unionised coal mining under collective bargaining than in non-union iron ore and gold mining sectors under individual contracts. The figures are there for everyone to see. Labor productivity did not improve during the decade of statutory individual contracts, which started with the introduction of AWAs in 1996. And most studies suggested productivity declined under work choices. So the evidence doesn't bear out the case. So let's not pretend that the push from business to wind back the Fair Work Act is actually about productivity and the national interest. Yes, we can shift money from workers by paying people less and making them work longer and harder. Yes, business would like that, but a shop assistant at Maher going without weekend penalty rates does nothing for productivity. If bosses want to pay less, they should be upfront and say so. The debate should be honest and not shrouded in euphemisms like efficiency, productivity and competitiveness. I believe the federal government is only just starting to grasp the enormity of the challenge presented by this boom, the tussle for land and skilled labour, the heavy burden on social infrastructure, the fallout for other industries. The scale of the boom is difficult to conceive from Canberra. If you work in a mining area, it's obvious. On the drive from Mackay to Emerald in Queensland, you pass mine camps housing thousands of workers that have sprung up on the side of the road like mushrooms. The roads themselves have become killing fields. On Wednesdays, at change of shift, you can't move at Mackay Airport for all the workers wearing fluoro vests. But the ground is starting to shift. The commissioning of the white paper on Australia in the Asian century is a promising sign. The Asian century, the rapid industrialisation of India and China, is fuelled by Australian resources. Our economy will be transformed, but how it is transformed is very much up for grabs. Last week's Future Jobs Forum, brought to us by the determination of the manufacturing unions, delivered tangible results. Yes, for crying out loud, let's ask the mining companies to do the right thing. Let's require them to be transparent and accountable in their engagement with local industry. They spend millions telling us that they're good corporate citizens. Let them prove it. It would be a good start. The answer to the high dollar pricing our goods out of international markets is not to cut wages. The answer must be to ensure access to the huge market for infrastructure we have right here at home, created by the mining boom. We need to build on this good first step with a long-term manufacturing plan. Without it, manufacturing may well not survive the 2 or 3 decades left in this boom. The wealth created in the resources sector must deliver a higher return to the community. The resources super profits tax was a good idea. The minerals resources rent tax lives in the shadow of the resources super profits tax, but at least it's a start. The mining companies scream that any impost will slow investment, but in a boom of this intensity, taking some of the heat and speed out of it would not be a bad thing. The only people wanting to exploit all of our resources all at once are the mining companies. I'm unashamedly pro-mining. I've spent most of my working life dealing with mining companies, but this boom needs to be managed. And believe me, the mining companies are not the ones to manage it. We need to look seriously at a sovereign wealth fund. A sovereign wealth fund could allow us to think big. To counterbalance the exchange rate is one model, to develop our manufacturing base for the long term, or to fund national infrastructure. It's entirely possible that when this boom ends, we will be left with no work to do, big holes in the ground, some airstrips in places no one wants to go, and large commodities ports that are of little interest to anyone but recreational divers. Let's stop quibbling over penalty rates in individual contracts. Let's have a real discussion about how we make sure this boom delivers for all Australians and leaves us a better place for it. And I say to those who Mr Anderson represents, cast off the shackles of IR reform in individual contracts that bind you to the miners, stand with us and governments and demand that the boom benefits us all. You have nothing to lose but your chains.